Welcome to the Alight Institute podcast. I am really happy to bring you today a conversation with Paula Scataloni. She is a therapist, healer, and visionary teacher. She has created transformative harmonics as a conscious community to support our collective awakening. Her work integrates sound, music, vibrational medicine, psychology, somatics, and ancient wisdom into modern paradigms of psychological, physical, emotional, and spiritual well-being. Through her programs and services, Paula guides healers, counselors, artists, and wellness professionals in aligning with their signature frequency, embodying their gifts, and stepping into heart-centered leadership that is rooted in harmony, connection, and collaborative living. Paula and I met about a year and a half ago, a little bit less, in an Akashic Records training program with Suzanne Alexandria of the Alexandria Institute. That was really a wonderful experience. And I wanted to bring you all this conversation with Paula because she's not only highly skilled at what she does and brings forward all kinds of interesting modalities that she's merging in some amazing ways, but she's one of the many, many people right now on planet Earth who have experienced a pretty significant transition from what we might call a conventional or typical professional pathway to something that is much more holistic, spiritual, earth-oriented, heart-focused, etc. So welcome, Paula. I am so happy to be talking with you today and bringing your story to the Alight podcast. And I think where I'd love to begin is for you to just give us an outline of what has your path been. My understanding is you started with some fairly normal, typical, conventional, and valuable training as a psychotherapist. And from there, a lot more has blossomed. But tell us something about that path.
Sure, sure. Thank you for having me. It's lovely to reconnect again. So, like many psychotherapists, most of us tend to keep looking for the most efficient, next best thing. It's just the nature, we're quite curious people in general. Many therapists also work intuitively or follow intuitively different programs that they're drawn to. And I would say most psychotherapists now are trauma trained because it's really impossible to do the helping and the healing without knowing about trauma. So that has been, for me, was a very much a turning point in my life in 2013 when somatic experiencing, which is a well-known and evidence-based trauma healing modality, came to North Carolina. And that was the first pivot that I made. Now, I had already been teaching about embodiment. My primary population for a decade at that point had been eating disorders. And I had taught about eating disorders and treated eating disorders from a Jungian perspective. But I was also the person who worked experientially with the body. So it was just in my nature to do experiential work, because that's the paradox of eating disorders, right? That it's about the body, but the treatment tended to be only psychological. So I was always a rebel and a renegade and on the fringe and never kind of doing what I was supposed to be, staying in the lines. I always push the lines out.
Well, because I'm actually fascinated that your first turning point was body oriented and somatic, because as you just said, the body has been left out so critically. I could tell my own really long story about that. So many of us could, but I'm just intrigued, and I love this, that it's not like you had a spiritual revelation first, but you recognized the importance of the body and trauma stored in the body and healing through the body. Wow, really cool.
Yeah. So thank goodness that evolved. And that was during a time where the word somatic was not a word yet. People thought, we were weird or that it was energy healing. And so it has now been grounded in science much, much more, right? Thanks to all the different modalities. And but once we start working with the body, then we do start to move into understanding more about the nervous system and energetics. So it's a natural graduation, right, into an expanded perception of where health is, some very basic principles that are found in osteopathic medicine, which is about the unity of all the body parts, right? That everything's connected, and that we are also universally connected beyond the body, right? To our environment and how the environment influences us, and that the body and we as humans are built to self-correct in the right environment, right? So self-regulation. But where I came in and where I took another pivot was in 2017, someone handed me a sound system technology that was sound, and it was developed for children with autism and studied and researched with that to find that to be very helpful. But the trauma community was now exploring it. And that took me into another rabbit hole as I started to understand the attachment and bonding system through the lens of the auditory pathway. And when we think of babies and infants and how they learn about safety is through the mother's coo, we wrap them up tightly, we bounce them, the vestibular system. So this sort of, many of my clients in my way of treating had to do with helping and supporting early childhood wounds. So it was a very natural transgression for me to move from one to another. I was also utilizing touch. There's many therapists that have moved on to understanding touch as a language, one of our first languages, right? So all of these were sort of separate ways that I worked with developmental trauma. And then COVID happened. And when COVID happened, on one level, I had to pivot to working online. And how was I going to do that? And I found the sound to be a very natural way to pivot because people could be in their own homes listening to the sound program. They put it all into your iPhone, so you can listen in the privacy of your own home. And I could still employ somatic tools while you were listening. Now, then on top of that, which would be a natural, I'm still in the therapy, right, seat. I had an experience through my own trauma and grief, the loss of a client, that cracked me open. And when I say that, people have different experiences of being cracked open, right? That metaphor. For me, it meant that not only did I would say I had a heart opening, right, to a point that it had a lot of the elements of what one would call a spiritual experience, right, transpersonal and spiritual experience that lasted a few days. And the result of it, though, was that the veil between the seen and unseen became very thin, so thin that I sought out a more indigenous practitioner to ask what had happened to me and to begin to understand how it was that I could work with people online and see things beyond with another level of my senses. And so I began to move into more quantum healing or energetics or shamanic practices that are more known in energy medicine or indigenous practices. So those were the teachers then that I began to gravitate towards to make sense of and understand what was happening to me.
Yes. Oh, wow. What a story. So you had done all of your training as a therapist and had worked for many years as a therapist and then brought in the somatic piece and then sound and then had this tremendous loss that sent you into a higher spiritual level of inquiry and support. So, okay, so now you're connected with a more shamanic perspective and practices. Well,
Yes.
I want to hear what happened next, but I think actually my question at this point is, were you scared as a professional? Because I mean, maybe you weren't in your line of work, but I think a lot of us who are working in a fairly conventional framework, even though you already were bringing in science-based but new approaches like somatics and sound, we can feel like it's really risky in all kinds of ways, personally, professionally, relationally, to step visibly into a more spiritual type of work. So I'm just curious how that felt to you. Were you afraid or not?
Yes. I will have to say that many somatic providers, our tolerance for the uncertainty and the unusual is pretty big. Somatic therapy and somatic trauma work involves something called dual awareness, where you can hold your present moment and be in a memory at the same time, which means you're in two different dimensional states. So my capacity to be in two-dimensional states was already quite evolved in that way. And my ability to track across the room and over the internet was also strong. Many somatic therapists have a higher sense of sentience, the ability to, we're like biofeedback machines, basically. Yeah. So some of it was not unusual because I was already doing it. The part that tipped me into the unknown was what I was seeing, because that perception, that aspect of our higher consciousness, where we can see things beyond the 3D, was not in my domain at that time. And so that's why I sought those who might help me make sense of it. Yeah. I ended up with both a indigenous practitioner who was a shaman, who we had a connection with someone named Hale Mukua in Hawaii. I've lived 13 years in Hawaii, and so I have an affinity for the islands and the healers there. But she led me to Hank Wesselman, who was an anthropologist. He was a Westerner who worked very closely and wrote a book called The Bowl of Light with Hale Mukua. And he taught Westerners how to shift into right brain consciousness and journey. And so I spent a few years learning how to do that, how to shift into the right brain and journey, and to utilize that both as a vehicle for my own connection to the unseen world, but also that healing could happen in the right brain. So I spent time understanding it from that perspective, the indigenous wisdom around that, but also as an anthropologist, he had studied this in various cultures, right? So it went beyond the Hawaiian culture. But it brought me back to, because I'd lived so many years in Hawaii, when I lived there, I was very connected to the natural world. I was very connected to the heart, I would say, more so. And it's not unusual if you live in Hawaii, right? When I moved to North Carolina, I lived near Duke and UNC. I became much more left brain, much more focused on the credentials and the logic. And so it brought me back to some things about myself that I had left when I left Hawaii, which was like 12 years ago. So I was remembering aspects.
That is so interesting. I think I had heard you mention Hawaii, but I didn't fully know you had lived there for that long. And as someone myself with an academic background since I was 18, basically, I really want to highlight what you just said about how you were impacted by these different environments, because that's not to say that everyone who's on a growth and inquiry and expansion path needs to necessarily live in different places, but that we do need to be aware of how we're being influenced, maybe both enlarged and kind of shrunk down, as maybe happened to you in the more academic, intellectual communities around those big universities. We're being enlarged in some ways and shrunk down in others by the atmosphere we move in and the people we're moving with and the local cultural expectations. And so it's just important for us to be aware of that, whether we kind of move to other places in mind, conversation, reading, friendships, the internet, or travel, or maybe sometimes moving, or even, joining different social or professional groups where we are. I wanted to highlight that because I think a lot of people can feel stuck and they don't really know why, and they don't realize, well, all of my influences are leaning in this direction, but you've experienced those two very distinctive environments here in the US, and it sounds like they impacted you quite a bit.
Yes. If you, this might resonate for you, I do feel it influences what we bring forward and how we package our perceptions, right? And how we make sense. And while I do value the balance between the science and the sacred, I think that at the institutions I was working at Duke, there was an overvalue, right, on the logical, which then dismissed or repressed some of the more sacred intelligence, or I would call our inner technology, right?
100%.
Although I was the person on staff who would bring in movement, and there was a developing meditation course and program there. So, it was an interesting fine line that I was walking for many years, but finally in 2014, I left and started a program with another psychotherapist to teach practitioners how to bring the body into eating disorder treatment. And that training program still exists right now. It's called Embodied Recovery for those that are interested, that are working in the field of eating disorders. And it's doing quite well and allowing people to step into new paradigms that broaden the more cognitive paradigms. And then in 2019, during COVID, I left that business and decided not decided. I think I had a period of time where I went into more of the right brain to the point where I didn't have a thought for about 3 months. It was just very spacious and kind of saturated in that right brain process. And the culmination of that after the 3 months was an awareness that there was a new type of therapy emerging. There was a new type of provider emerging. And that provider was going to merge the left and the right brain. And so I became a midwife of that. And that is what I'm shepherding in now, and listening to get clear on how I'm going to bring that forward in the world and the type of people who might come to work under me, or not work, but mentor, I would say more, themselves. And so I feel now I have the clarity to do that, which for me is really understanding where the intersection of all these different therapies and their fundamental unifying principles that guide all of them, and how sound can be the hub for supporting us in psychological, emotional, mental, and spiritual growth simultaneously. And that's why I love it.
And you've already launched this, I know, because you have opened your program. Tell us a little bit about that so that people can gain a sense of how you're weaving all this together. I know you've opened a program where you're primarily training other therapists and mental health and wellness professionals, and I think you've had some inquiries from physicians as well, to treat people as whole human beings. But of course, your emphasis is more on the mental, emotional, spiritual health than physical. since you're a mental wellness practitioner, but tell us a little bit about the components of your program and what it's like for your students so far. What are you hearing from your students? Is it shock and awe, or because they don't even know about all these things previously, or is it I'm home? Anyway, yeah, tell us about the
Sure.
program and students' experiences.
Sure. Well, initially, this program started as a way to train psychotherapists in a sound technology program that was available for licensed clinicians and still is. You need to have a license to use it, who are interested in sound. And in its original formation, it was there to support people who had sensory processing difficulties or to support therapy to become more rich, more robust through cultivating safety in the body. It's called the Safe and Sound program.
Safe and sound.
Sound.
I've actually done it through a facilitator in Kathleen King's Primal Trust.
Okay.
I just did it this spring, so just a few months ago, and it was very helpful for me. I
Yeah,
found it very, very helpful. And now I think there's Rest and Restore
there is.
is
There's
this new
two.
iteration that I think I want to try, or I may repeat Safe and Sound a bit because I've had a fairly tumultuous year. But yeah, I just wanted to drop in. Like I've actually experienced that and have really seen the difference in my nervous system.
Yeah, it's fabulous. It's a vagal nerve stimulator. It also works, and what I bring to it is working with the attachment and bonding system, your social engagement system, to support it in developing more coherence and actually rewiring it.
Yeah. So
So,
I just want to slow that down a little bit for people who are
sure.
new to this. This is especially helpful for people with developmental trauma, AKA childhood and youth trauma, or maybe other like big significant spikes of adult trauma and adversity. And the audio sounds, which you listen to for anywhere from a few minutes to 30, 40 minutes a day, um, they're designed, now here's where my knowledge kind of drops off, you'll have to fill in, but they're designed to stimulate and kind of balance different regions of the brain and the vagus nerve. Did I get that approximately
Close,
correct?
close. The way I describe it is for the safe and sound, one of the ways that we cultivate a sense of safety is through the sound of a mother's coo and the parental, right? The caregiver's voice is tuning us and tuning the vagus nerve when we come out of the womb in that first year of life to essentially allow us to hear and experience the world through our sensory system accurately. And so it's supporting the sensory system to be a more accurate radar of the outside world, and also supports internal processes, interoception, your ability to know you're hungry, you're tired, you're cold, you have emotions. And so it's really lubricating the neural pathways for that. The Rest and Restore, which is new, is supporting more of the, it works with what's called the dorsal shutdown in the gut. So a fundamental shutdown of that viscera, which is giving us information about our state, our internal state. They call this, it's akin to stealth meditation and to entrainment of the breath. When we have trauma, we don't breathe, right? Or we have very shallow breath. And so it's entraining us out of that state into a state of relaxation and deep parasympathetic states. Now, I've taken both of those programs, and then we apply the indigenous wisdom and my support of understanding resonance and somatic attunement and energy, I would say. And I turn that experience into more of a shamanic journey, where we then, some people, I would say, some people may experience it in a very somatic way, right? Where they're feeling the nervous system reset and feeling more spacious and more capacity in their ability to tolerate stress because the system itself is getting a reset. Okay. Others who have experience in journeying, in inner journeying, may utilize a system to go into a deep parasympathetic state, shift into the right brain consciousness, and then begin to journey and begin to have experiences and move into more trauma processing, I would say, with it. Yeah. And then a very much more experientiated, if we want to even go further, we look at the work of Stan Grof, who's a psychiatrist who developed holotropic breath work and takes people into transpersonal states. And so then, there's another layer of it for those that are needing or it's hard to determine what type of experience you're going to have when you come with me, because it really has to do with your system and what your system's ready for, and it'll click into what it's ready for. But I do set it up in a way that supports that invitation for deeper processing beyond the somatic, and that is what makes my program different than others that use the program.
Yes, yes. I'm in awe, Paula, of how many modalities you've studied and how clearly you see them as components that are complementary and can fit together. What are the students who've been working with you experiencing and saying? Like, are they just astonished because they come to you without familiarity with some of these modalities, or are they kind of aware of them, but they're just not sure how to apply them to their practice as therapists? What are you hearing from your students?
Sure. Many come because they have the tool, but they might say, well, I don't know if it really works, or it's not working in a way that's very profound. I really don't know what to charge for this because it's not giving me enough to actually charge an extra $100. So they're coming because they want to understand the tool more. And I'm of the mind that you as the provider also are influencing them with your attachment system and your resonance, right? So they need to go through it themselves. And that's essentially how the program initially was set up, because to understand it through their body so they can speak from that wisdom. And that is generally what happens. They have an experience that's very different than what they've had just by taking the online training or using the program by themselves, because there is something different fundamentally that happens when you're sitting across from someone who is in their heart coherence.
Oh, I'm sure.
While you're listening.
Mm-hmm. I'm sure. Yeah. Okay. So the distinction you're making is that with the Safe and Sound protocol and now Rest and Restore, a lot of people are using it independently, putting on the headphones for a certain period of time during the day, but you're aware that doing this in the presence of a trained, grounded, somatically aware, heart open therapist is a whole other level.
It's a game changer. It's a game changer. Mm-hmm. So it moves it, I think, more into the healing space. Right, because we're creating a container between us for more to occur. And the provider is, I feel, it's shifting from fixing someone to simply being a space holder and allowing the organicity of the self-healing capacity to guide the process. So it is a different paradigm than one would have if one was traditionally trained, right? So it does fall into more of the non-Western models. And so then I had a physician from China contact me because he was asked to bring singing bowls into a hospital in China and wanted to have his own experience of using sound and understand it in a more in-depth way, right, before he moved into that role. And what is that role? That role, it's different. It's not just bringing a singing bowl or an instrument in, it's using yourself as an instrument as well. And so I think that's a piece that this program offers those that are looking. And I would say that is one of the major transformations a clinician makes in the program, is they understand the importance of their role and their presence and their heart-centeredness and the effects of it in the room more deeply.
That seems so important to me. I just want to comment and emphasize that because I think what you're saying is this is really big for any wellness provider of any type, yoga teacher, physician, therapist, sound healer. You're talking about the distinction between the kind of intellectual approach of I've studied this and this is what I offer to people because I know how to do it. I know how the system works and I deliver the system. Now, that can be really valuable, but what you're talking about is this much deeper, more integrated approach where whether the person is a yoga teacher, a therapist, a sound healer, a physician, we could list all kinds of other practitioners, they're aware of their own being and presence and physicality and their own level of integration and groundedness and somatic presence and all of this as possibly their biggest offering to their clients or patients. I mean, that is a reconceptualization of the healing arts. And of course, there have been practitioners forever who really get this. But for most of us with Western training, you are talking about a brand new cutting edge of revolution and revelation. And it's really deeply significant.
Yeah. I feel like the phrase I'd like to use is, or the metaphor, is that you are a tuning fork, right? So the more we can understand that, and whether you're a clinician or a parent or a person on the street connecting to your grocery store clerk, right?
Or a colleague in any kind of workplace.
Yeah. You're emanating a frequency, and it's time for us to become more aware of what that frequency is that we're emanating and how it affects other people.
Let's bring it back to you for a minute. How do you feel now as a person and a professional? Because you have stacks of training and you've integrated them in pretty amazing ways. And now you're ramping up the training that you offer others. How do you feel different from how you felt at points where you were less integrated with all of these modalities?
It's a good question. I feel my growth is particularly in the last 7 years, is very much what we've just spoken about of doing my own work at a fundamental level around these systems that I teach about: the attachment and bonding system, intimacy and relationships, the energetics, how I experience myself and the world. And from that place, because I've had to do a deep dive into all of those areas, I feel like a more grounded person who can hold space for a large group now of people and not have to move in and fix them, not have to move in and rescue them, trust their capacity to find their resilience and be with their emotions. Many therapists over coddle sometimes, they move into help, which then dismisses the client's own capacity to find that strength from within, right? I believe that there's an art to knowing how much to titrate and give a person to experience, adding something to the system, and then stepping back and creating the holding space to allow them to move through whatever emotions or physiological shifts, to not interfere and to tolerate their discomfort and watch and allow that integration to happen while coaching them and supporting them in staying present for the process of change to occur. Mm-hmm. Right? So that I have strengthened that capacity in the last 7 years to the point where I'm comfortable in large groups, which is why this program is expanding now, because I think it's ready to expand beyond 6 or 8 or 12 clinicians into something bigger.
And you do work with people live in retreats as well, right? In-person retreats.
I'm moving towards a retreat as a culmination of the work. So as folks come together and we develop that capacity and coherence and connection with one another, then we will travel somewhere and spend 4 to 6 days in a deeper dive. But I'm also, part of my background I haven't talked about is I'm a movement therapist of sorts. I've been doing embodied movement since 1999, since I was working in treatment centers. So for me, music and sound are my language. And so when I'm doing movement barefoot with world music, to bring people into the body and to invite play and spontaneity and joy, that's also a place that very much is akin to my heart. And so that's where, at a retreat type setting, I can bring that piece forward a little bit more.
Yeah. So before we close, I'll ask you to review a little bit more, how people can find you and what your offerings are right now. But one thing I want to ask you first is, as someone who's been through, I would say, a significant professional transformation that has been lengthy and complex because you have stacked so many areas of knowledge and experience and wisdom, what advice would you offer to any listener who might be feeling the world is really changing and I want to contribute in some kind of higher or deeper or more heart-centered way, and X is the professional training I have. Maybe I want to stay with that and deepen it as you have, or maybe I want to go in a different direction, but you're kind of at the end of your transformation and you're really opening up your offerings, your service, your contribution. What advice would you give to someone who's at the very beginning?
Mm-hmm.
How are people supposed to find their way forward?
I know.
There's not a tidy recipe. I don't think there's one answer, but what's your set of suggestions?
Mm-hmm. I do feel this question comes up quite a bit. And I do feel, thankfully, that there are many paths that we can take. So staying true to yourself and what you're guided towards, right? You may ask someone's opinion, but to really make an embodied decision for yourself of what feels right. Right now, any program that's out there, and there's tons that range from $30 to $300 to $3,000, that start to bring you into the world of somatics and the body, is critical, I think, at this time, for your own regulation, for your expansion of understanding that your body is actually communicating to you, and that the nervous system is the hub. Because what happens once we understand that and we start thinking through the lens, all the diagnosis and all the labels and all the things that we might say, are the things we might be taking medication for or identifying ourselves with, start to fall away, and we get this deeper understanding around health and what creates dis-ease and how do we find our way back. Yeah. So somatics and the body and some of the influences of polyvagal theory or the work of Stephen Porges or Gabriel Cram And you might even know others who are pivotal and foundational at opening us beyond the current models, right, that are out there. And their programs and services we can take a bite of in small chunks as you begin to step forward into more and more into the body.
Yeah.
And then I would say once you step into the body, there's going to be other things that might feel good to you in your own exploration, whether that's somatic therapy, internal family systems, yoga, breath work, sound. All of these are going to be great options for you to begin to, again, take another bite of getting to know yourself a little bit better at a deeper level. Because at the end of the day, all of everything I've talked about, I think, invites us into our own self-healing. As we do that, it creates the space for us to tap into what I call your embodied wisdom. And that's really where the answers to where do I go next? Do I turn left? Do I turn right? Do I take this program? That is the fundamental shift we're making, because we might have in the past made those decisions logically from the mind, right? I'm going to explore these programs and I'll write the 5 things about this program of 5 things. That's how I used to make decisions, right? And then I'll decide, am I going to that graduate school or that graduate school?
Right. Or the experts in this field say that X is what one needs to learn and all that other stuff is not relevant. Yes. Those very mind-based decisions.
Yeah. So to lead from the heart, to be a heart-centered leader, to be a heart-centered helper, change agent, or parent at this time, we start with the body, we get to know ourselves, and as that healing happens, our capacity to listen deeply, to access that embodied wisdom increases. And that's the step towards sovereignty. When people use that word sovereignty, for me, that is what that word means, right? That we are turning inward to use that internal GPS system as our primary guidance, rather than giving our power away to something externally.
Thank you for that. And it makes me want to highlight that, and I mean, tell me if you disagree, but I think modern culture has led to so many of us being disassociated most of the time, where we're really living from the neck up, and we might be feeling unease, but as you just said, the only place we know to turn for answers is, okay, what's the rational thing here? Like which expert should I consult, or which degree should I get? And then, okay, I have that tool, I'm going to apply it. So you're really talking about how anybody who's seeking any kind of shift or transformation needs to make sure that they're engaging in the body-based somatic practices. For people with chronic illness, I'll mention Dr. Kathleen King's Primal Trust, which gathers together a lot of the approaches and tools that you've talked about today, Paula. And then I also just want to highlight, because I know for me, this has been a very steep learning curve and it was totally bewildering at first. So just to break it down for people a little bit more, what I think you're saying is whether people turn to yoga or breath work or any kind of really body focused experiential movement practice, so not just going to the gym, but moving and paying attention to how the body and the emotions feel, though, or working with a somatic therapist, these are all ways to be very integrated, whole, and authentic, and also soul guided and heart guided, because a lot of this guidance shows up in the body. So if anybody listening to us is really seeking transformational shift, did I kind of sum that up well in an accessible way for people in terms of what you're talking about these body-oriented practices?
Yes, very succinct. Very succinct. I think in the past as well, when we thought of inner transformation, the model may have been to leave the body,
Oh, yeah.
right?
Right.
I work with a lot of
Cognitively,
meditators.
emotionally, and spiritually.
Yeah.
And also, I want to highlight for anybody interested in kind of ascension spirituality, the 19th, 20th century understanding of that was we're going to get out of here, either in meditation or whatever, like let's get out of the physical. What I think is a much more current and deep and profound and enlightened understanding of spirituality and ascension spirituality is we do this through the body, this transformation, this enlightenment. We do it with and through and in the body.
Yes. Yes. So that is for those who are practicing, well, I think having a clear mind and understanding ourselves as spiritual beings is an aspect. The direction that I would like to invite people to turn is down into developing the tolerance to be with their emotions.
Yes, that is really profound. That is changing, can change, and will change our world. I have experienced myself, and I've known other people who just use meditation to dissociate further. And I mean, that's not a bad tool if you can go to a place of peace and respite, but I don't think it transforms your life. It doesn't heal your emotions and body typically, and it sure doesn't heal your relationships. Oh, that's another topic. Wow, so wonderful, Paula. I am just feeling tremendous respect for your layers of expertise and the gorgeous way you're weaving them together. Tell us where people can find you and what your services are at this time.
Sure. So one of the ways to find me is through my website, www.paulascataloni.com. You can also find me through my podcast, which is on Spotify, YouTube, iHeartRadio, and Apple TV. It's called Transformative Harmonics. And then recently I've started a Substack. I love to write. And so I'm finding that to be another pathway to offer free resources. Some of the services that I offer, as we've spoken about, are group oriented. I do believe that there is another level of healing that can occur when we come together in groups. So have a mentorship / group experiential that you can engage in a short format of 2 months. If you just want to take a bite, you can come for 4. If you'd like to camp out a little bit and tuck yourself in, or you can spend a whole year with me now and with other teachers that I'm bringing in. And so that's what I'm mainly known for, is the groups. And then I have a small individual practice where I might see individuals who are wanting more private support using sound. And I use both the sound technology, but I also curate my own playlists. And that is something new that I'm finally putting out there. So I welcome people who, if music is your pathway to healing, and you've used it in your life, I tend to get a lot of musicians or musically inclined people that want to utilize music as their therapy and their healing modality at this time.
That's pretty amazing. I think you mentioned to me recently that you're starting to have some performers consult you. And I mean, that's a whole other topic for another time. But if we think, so far we've talked today mostly about people in the wellness, mental health space as tuning forks and really deeply serving their clients or patients. But if we also start thinking about performers, like offering a kind of tuning and healing to their performances, oh wow, that's really a whole next level of cultural ceremony, healing, and renewal.
Yeah, powerful, powerful.
Yes. Paula, I loved speaking with you today. I am just thrilled by what you're doing. And thank you so much for all of the studying and experiencing and weaving together that you have personally done so that you now have this gorgeous, rich basket of experiences and guidance and wisdom to offer to others.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.